Gray Penner was 120 pages into his newest Clive Cussler novel when he heard his wife's car finally pull into their garage. He touched his Fitbit to see the time was 8:17 p.m. He grimaced. This was the third time this week his wife had come in late from work. Up until 4 months ago, she had never come home late in the 7 years they were married. Gray wasn't born yesterday, nor the day before. He didn't think anything the first few times Kelly had called to let him know she'd be late. Then he noted one evening when she got home later, her lipstick was slightly smudged, something almost unheard of as Kelly was almost OCD about her appearance. He was pretty sure he noticed another man's aftershave as she leaned in to kiss him hello. So that night in bed, he purposely nuzzled up to her neck as he spooned her from behind. He didn't know a lot about fragrances, but he knew there was quite a bit of difference between the white shoulders he bought her and whatever the hell he was smelling. Gray almost gasped when his auburn-haired wife walked in the door. At 30, he felt that she was every bit as beautiful as the first time he had seen her in college, and his near gasp was his usual reaction every time he saw her after being apart for several hours or more. Kelly smiled to herself when she saw her husband's usual reaction when she walked in. She knew his reaction was truly a sincere compliment. Plus, she had to admit to herself that she found it arousing that her husband found her alluring so soon after she had been attached to another man's lips. "Hey, sweetie," she said as she strutted over to him, gave him a quick kiss on his lips, and turned to head upstairs, her unseen smirk both confident and condescending. "Just need to get comfy. Be down in a minute." Gray hadn't said a word while his wife breezed in and headed upstairs, not that she seemed to notice. He noticed, however, the now usual scent of aftershave. Not for the first time, he furrowed his brow as she climbed the stairs, dreading the upcoming confrontation that had to happen soon if he was to keep his marriage alive. At this point in time, Gray was pretty sure his wife hadn't totally crossed the line with the Prince of Paco Rabanne, as he thought of her would-be seducer, but he believed she had been moving closer. For 7 years, Gray had feared that his beautiful wife would one day realize she had married beneath herself in terms of aesthetics and seek to remedy that situation. Gray didn't see himself as an ugly man, but what he felt were average looks were no way in the same league as his spectacularly beautiful wife. The snake walking into the Garden of Eden was named Johan Wegman. Kelly was an assistant vice president at an international telecommunications firm. Johan was a well-built 40-year-old blonde vice president who transferred in from the firm's headquarters in the Netherlands about 6 months ago. Gray heard way more than he wanted to about the Dutch transfer for the first 2 weeks before Kelly went completely radio silent about him. Gray had his suspicions. "Hey, that new Dutch guy still in your office?" Gray asked one evening during dinner when Kelly was talking about her day. "Yeah. Why do you ask?" she answered, somewhat confused. "For a few weeks. He was the only one you talked about. Now it's like he's disappeared completely," Gray said. "Well, he works in another department. We don't see each other much," she said, her face coloring more than a little. "Huh," Gray mumbled, shoveling in a bite of food as he noted that his wife had just lied to his face. The late nights started soon thereafter. Kelly found herself attracted physically to the 6'4", 225-pound Dutchman from the first moment she was introduced to him. As much as he was a physical specimen, he projected an air of extreme confidence, almost bordering on arrogance. He spoke 3 languages and had deep blue eyes that Kelly felt seemed to look into her soul every time he looked at her. If she was honest with herself, she had to admit that she felt for him the first time Johan smiled at her. In truth, Kelly and Johan didn't work in different departments and actually interacted quite a bit in their jobs. The two were going to lunch by themselves within a couple of weeks of Johan coming on board. Kelly loved her husband and never gave a thought to what was becoming a burgeoning relationship with Johan. For his part, Johan was very aware of the fact that his relationship with Kelly was growing because he was gently pushing it that way. Johan knew the woman was married, but figured she would let him know if he was pushing too far. Extramarital affairs were not anathema in his country. 2 weeks later, the pair was working on a project that wouldn't quite be done by the end of the day. Johan suggested they could pick up the project again first thing in the morning, or just put in a little extra time that evening at the office. Her smile told him everything he needed to know. She quickly called Gray at his office to tell him she would be a couple of hours late. He noted to himself that it was the first time she would be late in the many years she had worked for her company. But since he occasionally had to work late, he had no complaints and told her he would fix dinner on that night. She gushed over how considerate he was. The two left the office at 7, even though they had finished their work by about 5:30. They were both aware of the time. Working, or rather staying, late started to become a regular thing for the pair, who spent much of their extra time talking at first. That evolved into touching, cuddling, and kissing. Kelly was completely aware that she was balanced atop the edge of a slippery slope, but she was enjoying having her husband and a boyfriend. In fact, she was so caught up in her own feelings that she was either unaware or uncaring that her husband had noticed. Coming out of college, Gray had gotten a good position with a good salary at a small local telecommunications firm. Kelly, having the same degree as Gray, had started out in a lesser position, but with an international firm. The two had a plan to remain childless until they were 30. They also soon decided that Kelly would be the first to go back to school online to get her master's in business so she could advance in her company. Once she got her master's, it would be Gray's turn so he could advance in his job. Kelly got her master's in 4 years and soon got a promotion that boosted her salary and position in her company above her husband's money and place in his. He was very proud of his wife and pleased that their plan for their careers was working. Caught up in her own financial and personal success, Kelly lost track of the couple's plan. When it came time for Gray's turn at getting a master's, she argued that they should instead use that money to buy a house in which they could raise a family. Gray wasn't happy with his dreams being subjugated, but he had to admit that buying a house for their future family was a good idea. He could always go back to school in a couple of years, she reminded him. Kelly always seemed to come up with something big the couple needed to spend its money on instead of Gray's MBA. He didn't want to appear selfish, so he always acquiesced to his wife's wishes. Kelly's ego very much enjoyed her being the major breadwinner and having the bigger job among the pair. She began to see herself as the more equal among two equal partners. Kelly had butterflies in her stomach as she descended the stairs. She loved her husband, but she needed Johan, needed to feel him, needed to spend the night with him, needed to snuggle with him after the two of them had intimacy. She just couldn't cheat with him, though. She had to tell her husband first so it wouldn't be cheating. She knew he loved her every bit as much as she loved him, and he would give her this one weekend, this hall pass. He had never denied her anything. "Dinner's in the microwave. You just need to zap it for about a minute," Gray said flatly when Kelly appeared downstairs. "Thanks, babe. I'll get it in a bit. Can we talk?" she asked. Gray raised his eyes from his book. Dirk Pitt was going to have to wait. Gray could tell Kelly had something important she wanted to say to him. Did it have something to do with what he wanted to talk to her about soon? "I want a hall pass this weekend, Gray," Kelly said hesitantly, but clearly. Gray sat frozen in his spot on the sofa. His brain went into overdrive. He hoped he didn't look as stunned as he felt. He felt like his insides wanted to come up to the outside of his body. "Pardon me?" he asked, knowing that he had indeed heard his wife correctly. "I need to spend an entire weekend with Johan Wegman. We have feelings that need to be addressed once. Just once. I love you, Gray, not him, and I will come back to you after this weekend and spend the rest of my life showing you just how much I love you." Gray felt even sicker to his stomach, knowing that just by asking, Kelly had ended their marriage. Still, he figured this tragedy had to be played out. "What if you decide after this weekend that once isn't enough?" he queried. "What if you decide you need him more than one weekend? What if you decide you need him more than me?" "That won't happen. I promise," she said quickly. "Really? How can you promise that? You promised me, you vowed, that you would forsake all others for me 12 years ago, and you're going to break that promise easily." She colored again and started looking everywhere except directly at him. "I need this, Gray, and I know you love me enough to give this to me," she whispered. "To be exact, Kelly, you don't need this, but you certainly want it, and you're hoping that I'll be stupid enough to give it to you. Not going to happen," he reiterated. "But I don't own you, so if you really want to do it, you can. Just remember that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction." "Thank you, Gray. I'm glad you understand," Kelly said. "No, babe. Don't try to pretend you don't comprehend me completely. I just told you to do what you feel you must do, and then I'll do what I must do," he said. "Whatever," she replied. Kelly was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when Gray walked in the door the next night. He spotted a small bag sitting near the door when he walked in. She was definitely dressed for a night out, he thought, as he noted she was wearing one of her sexiest dresses, a mid-thigh cornflower blue number that showed a pretty good amount of her cleavage. "Seems that you're pretty sure of yourself," Gray said as he put down his keys and wallet. She smiled coquettishly. "I'm pretty sure of my loving husband," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow. "Now give me a kiss goodbye and have a great weekend. No sulking," she said. Gray wanted to grab her by her arms and shake her until her head fell off. Instead, he gave her his saddest smile and shook his head. "God, I loved you so much, babe," he whispered before turning and walking upstairs. Although she realized that he didn't kiss her goodbye, Kelly never picked up on Gray using the past tense of love as she left the house. Her mind was already several miles down the road, where Johan awaited her arrival. She felt like a 16-year-old virgin about to attend her first prom. Kelly and Johan had been planning their weekend for the past 2 weeks. After 3 months of escalating kisses and groping, the pair had decided it was time to see where their relationship would lead. Johan had no problem with the fact that Kelly was married. She had told him the two were working on some things in their marriage. She met Johan in the lobby of the hotel, and the two registered in as Mr. and Mrs. Johan Wegman. They went up to their room and dropped off their luggage. Before leaving the room, Johan had Kelly give him a twirl. He responded with a low whistle, then pulled her in for a deep, passionate kiss. Lord, this man could kiss, she thought. Their reservation at the upscale steakhouse was for 7 p.m., so they had to untangle and get on the way. The meal was scrumptious. They enjoyed a nice bottle of wine with the food, but only one because both wanted to be at their best. They each had a gelato for dessert. They talked in hushed tones throughout the meal, enjoying each other's company. They touched gently. To anyone watching, they would have looked like a married couple very much in love. The remnants of a medium-sized pepperoni pizza and 4 empty beer bottles were on the snack table near Gray's recliner. Although Gray was a fairly accomplished cook, he most certainly wasn't up to the task of cooking on this night. After some thought, he decided that pizza and beer were the perfect meal on the night his wife would be giving her body to another man. Once he was done eating, Gray went upstairs to the master bedroom with several large trash bags. He spent the next 30 minutes throwing all of Kelly's clothes haphazardly into the bags, then walked them downstairs and placed them by the front door. He took a little more care with her jewelry and toiletries while placing them in a box and also putting them by the door. Satisfied to a degree and angry beyond description, Gray went back downstairs, put a DVD into the player, and settled in to watch his favorite all-time movie, the Mel Brooks classic, Young Frankenstein. Kelly and Johan had barely gotten back into their room when he crushed his lips to hers. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and the two stood there passionately for about a minute. From what she had observed through his suit pants at the office, Kelly thought Johan would be a little bigger and thicker than her husband, especially when she factored in Johan's size advantage. He had 6 inches and 40 pounds over her husband. No longer fully clear-headed, Kelly noticed that Johan's size, even when fully engaged, didn't seem to surpass what she had expected. She had heard her friends talk about the difference between a grower and a shower, but hadn't paid much attention. As Johan's situation progressed, it became clear that there wasn't much difference in size compared to her husband's, leaving her with a sense of unmet expectations. The next day, Saturday, the pair were scheduled to enjoy a day of activity before another high-end dinner and then carnal activities. Kelly was hoping that the previous evening was just a one-off. Gray spent the entire day on Saturday by himself, not even turning on his television until the sun went down. No matter how he looked at his dilemma, he couldn't see any way that he could stay married to his wife. He knew he still loved her. That didn't magically disappear in a day. But he couldn't brook the disrespect she had recently shown him, nor would he ever trust her again, waiting for her to claim a hall pass whenever she wanted to have intimacy with some other guy. A rerun of Leave It to Beaver was playing on the screen in front of him, but it could have been adult videos for all Gray knew and cared. He took another swig of beer and stared straight ahead, his brain returning to happier times with Kelly. To be truthful, Gray was never quite sure how the two wound up together. As business majors in the same year at Arizona State University, the two had several classes together, but Gray never suspected that the stunning young woman even knew who he was. She always seemed to have a small posse of admirers around her, but early in their junior year, she pulled up the seat next to him in an honors accounting class. She seemed to go out of her way to flirt with him during class, and to his shock, she asked him out for coffee when the class ended. Of course, the young man said yes. The pair was just about inseparable for the rest of their college years and married about 6 months after graduation. Up until a few months ago, Gray was sure the couple was in it for the long haul. Recent events, however, had shown him cracks in the marriage, and then Kelly had done the unthinkable. Kelly was lying in bed next to a sleeping Johan, wondering how much sucking up she was going to have to do to get her husband to forgive her, weekend out of time. She heard the words her husband had said to her when she asked or told him about the hall pass, but she knew Gray loved her too much to let a weekend destroy their marriage. Still, she also never thought she would even have time to worry about her husband while she was with Johan. The day out with Johan was marvelous. He had a great manner and a great presence, but back in the room for the second night, his presence again seemed to leave him. He was again selfish and wooden, even though the woman was again giving him the benefit of the doubt in her head. I annoyed Gray for this, she thought to herself. God, I am an absolute dumb. After a shower and a nice brunch out, Johan was all smiles as he and Mrs. Wegman checked out of the hotel. Kelly was gracious and smiled the entire time. The two enjoyed a passionate kiss in the parking lot. Kelly thought it was just about the most passionate part of the weekend, before each got in their cars for the drive home. Kelly used her hour drive home to clear her head and reinforce her position in what she was sure would be an ongoing debate with her husband over her hall pass. She was convinced Gray would eventually give in despite his initial anger and threats. After all, she almost always got her way with him. If worse came to worse, she thought, she would order some lingerie and catch up. She couldn't help but smile to herself as she thought how easy it is to sidetrack a man. Kelly pulled her car into the garage and shut off the engine. She double-checked her makeup in the rearview mirror, grabbed her bag out of the back seat, took a deep breath, and marched head held high into her house. Hey, I'm home, she called out as she entered the kitchen from the garage. She waited a couple of seconds for Gray to greet her, as would have been normal, but she was disappointed. She heard the big screen on in the family room and walked in, looking annoyed at what she considered her husband's childish behavior. Gray was seated in his recliner watching a baseball game. He looked away from the screen for a second and nodded in his wife's general direction without so much as a grunt. Needless to say, she was not pleased. That's how you're going to play this? Fine, she huffed and walked out of the room. What the hell are all these bags by the front door? She yelled. When Gray didn't answer, Kelly walked over and opened a bag. He heard her gasp, then heard more bags being opened. God damn! This isn't funny, Gray. What the hell do you think you're doing? She cried. Making it easier for you to move out when I serve you divorce papers, he responded, surprising her by coming up silently almost right behind her. No divorce. Not going to be a divorce, you Utes. We talked about this. It was one weekend. One weekend. We've been married 12 years. You can give me one weekend. First off, we didn't talk. You talked, I listened. You told me you were taking a hall pass. Once it was my turn to talk, I told you I wasn't going to accept that. Not my problem that you didn't take me seriously. We're married. That means no hall passes. Ever, Gray asserted. You would seriously divorce me for a weekend out of all the time we've been together? And all the time we would be together in the future? She asked, panic in her voice now. We won't be together in the future since you did this. I told you this. What part of I will do what I have to do did you not understand? Gray growled. Tears started to leak from Kelly's eyes. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, Gray didn't move to his wife to comfort her. You cheated on me with another man. Just because you told me first still doesn't mean it's not cheating, especially after I told you not to do it, Gray said. You didn't tell me not to do it. You told me I could make my own choices, she said, trying to twist the argument in her direction. And face the consequences of your actions. You seem to be able to recall only what you want to recall, Gray said. Kelly literally stomped around for several seconds, looking at her stuff in the bags. She was breathing heavily. Well, I'm not moving out. This is my house, too, she said. Fine, but since your stuff is already bagged, you can move your stuff into the guest room. I'm staying in the master, Gray said. Fine, she grumbled and started hefting bags back up the stairs. You going to help? I already did my part, he answered. I packed the bags. Gray went back into the family room and resumed watching the baseball game. He could hear his wife stomping around upstairs and muttering. When she finally came downstairs, Kelly flopped onto the family room sofa and went through the Sunday newspaper that Gray had placed on the end table near where she usually sat. She noisily started to read the paper, making sure it crackled every time she turned a page or shifted in her spot. Aren't you going to at least ask me how my weekend went? She huffed. Why would I want to know that? I assumed you had intimacy with him several times. Isn't that what cheating women do when they cheat on their husbands? Gray asked. Well, we also went out and did things and ate at several neat restaurants, she whined. Nice. I'm thrilled for you. Maybe one of your friends will be interested. Your husband for the moment is not. Gray noticed his wife didn't seem nearly as thrilled as he would have expected, especially after she made such a big deal about going. The fact that she wanted to talk about her experiences outside of intimacy told him that Johan might have been more of a dud than a stud. Not his problem, Gray thought to himself. Gray spent time on Monday splitting bank accounts and doing the financial maneuvering necessitated by a pending divorce. He wasn't able to get an appointment with his choice of a family law attorney for another week, so he knew he'd have to exist with Kelly in the same house for a while. Kelly spent her day ducking Johan. She was very aware that they were on opposite sides of the spectrum as to the success of the weekend. She knew that their relationship had changed forever, and not for the better. As much as anything, she desperately needed her husband to understand and come back to her so she could use Gray to put off future advances from Johan. Life had suddenly gotten very complicated for Kelly. She debated between having another sit-down with Gray or just letting life carry on as if nothing happened, hoping her husband would eventually cool down. She opted for the second choice as the path of least resistance, not looking forward to being called a cheating woman again by her husband. After some time spent looking at the situation from all angles, Kelly had to admit to herself that a cheating woman seemed much more accurate than loving wife. She shook her head sadly, wondering if she would have seen things differently if her weekend had been a ringing success instead of a dismal failure. Gray never said a word to Kelly when he got home from work, nor when the two sat down to eat. He muttered a quick thanks when he finished and picked up his plate. I'm sorry, Gray. I'm really sorry, Kelly whined as Gray started to move into the family room. After all these years, I guess I thought you loved me enough to give me a weekend. Loved you enough? I would have thought after all these years that you loved me enough not to ask for permission to be a cheating woman. How selfish and delusional can you be? Things got worse for Kelly the next day at work. 5 minutes after she got into her office, one of her best friends at her firm walked into her office and closed the door, a not-too-usual occurrence in the office. "Please tell me you didn't spend the weekend with the Dutch Thor," Emma LaSalle asked in a half-whisper, even with the door closed. Kelly's eyes opened wide. "He's been bragging?" she rasped, her face twisting in shame and anger. "I'm assuming if it didn't come from you, it came from him," Emma said. "But I didn't hear it from him. I heard a couple of the girls whispering about it in the break room while getting my coffee. If there's already whispering at 8 in the morning, it will be all over the office by noon. No way to hide it now." Kelly put her head in her hands. Emma watched as tears fell on her desk. "Yeah, you've become the cheating woman that every woman loves to hate, and every guy now wants to get a piece of. So how good was it?" she inquired, raising her eyebrows. "That's the biggest problem. It wasn't. I annoyed my husband big time for what?" she questioned. "Johan is big and handsome and charming and an absolute dud in the bed. He's hardly any bigger than Gray, and he's not half the man in bed, but he thinks he's God's gift to women." Emma's shocked look morphed into concern. "So how much do you have to make up to get back in your husband's good graces?" Emma asked, with no hint of a smile on her face. "I only wish it would be that easy," Kelly answered. "Gray keeps talking about divorce. 7 years together and he's going nuclear. Just like that. No, I'll think about it. No counseling. Nothing. I thought he'd be annoyed, but he's off the hook mad. I've never seen him so unreasonable. It's not like I didn't give him a heads up." "Yeah, but if he didn't approve of it, the heads up meant nothing. You're a smart woman. You really can't deny not knowing it could end up this way," Emma said. It was coincidental that Gray said almost the exact same thing to Kelly 2 weeks later when she called in tears after she had been served divorce papers at her office. "You told me I could have intimacy with him. You told me I could," she bawled through the phone. "No, I told you that it was your choice, but there would be consequences. I never gave you carte blanche to meet that blonde bastard. You made it all about what you wanted. Apparently, it didn't matter what I wanted," Gray asserted. Gray received a phone call from his in-laws a couple of weeks later, pleading for him to talk to their daughter and consider reconciling. Gray liked his in-laws and had always gotten along well with them. He tried to let them down gently. "She said she made a mistake and you won't talk to her. Won't let her explain," his father-in-law accused gruffly. "You're a better man than that, Gray." "She made a mistake. Is that really what she called it?" Gray said with more than a touch of irony in his voice. "Well, she really never told us what that mistake was. But after 7 years, don't you think you owe her some courtesy?" Ken Clayton said. "She didn't tell you the whole story, Ken. I don't call giving herself a hall pass to have a coworker for a weekend a mistake. I warned her there would be consequences," Gray said. "Oh, no, no, she couldn't have been that stupid," Ken cried. Gray didn't feel he needed to respond to what he was sure was more of a rhetorical comment. "I'm truly sorry," Ken said. "I don't know what else I can say. I won't be bothering you again." Gray groaned when he saw it was Kelly calling him the day after he spoke to her father. More excuses coming, he thought. "I'm sorry for my dad calling, Gray. I guess you found out that I wasn't exactly forthcoming with my parents. That's not the sort of thing you admit if you don't have to. I never thought he'd call, and I never thought you'd rat me out," she said softly. "I didn't rat you out. I told the truth," he said without emotion. "Yeah," she sighed. Kelly and her attorney tried to delay the divorce, but considering Gray filed on irreconcilable differences and there were no children, it went through in 9 months. Kelly couldn't believe that Gray wouldn't give her a second chance after her mistake, as she called it repeatedly. The mistake was way more than just having intimacy with another man, Kelly, he explained one evening when she tried to change his mind. You had an emotional affair way before you cheated with him. You disregarded my feelings. You disrespected me in the worst way. When did you stop loving me? Kelly sniffled back tears. Once upon a time, Gray used to try to comfort her when she cried. Now he accused her of trying to cry her way back inside his heart. I know you still love me, Gray. Why can't we try to reconcile? I do still love you. That's why this hurts so much, Gray answered. But it's apparent to me that you don't love me nearly as much as I love you. I would have never considered cheating on you, ever. But I could never trust that you wouldn't do this again, the next time another man catches your fancy. There won't be another man, I promise, she interjected quickly. There shouldn't have been a first man, Gray grumbled. You promised that when you made vows to me? Oh yeah, she whispered. Johan asked Kelly out several times during the time the divorce was pending, as did several other co-workers of Kelly's. Being outed as a cheating woman made the woman the talk of the office and got her called into Human Resources several weeks after the incident. We don't have a policy against employee dating, but we've always asked our employees to show a little discretion. When half the males on our staff are talking about you spending a weekend, playing house with Johan Wegman, and half the females are speculating who's next on your list, it's not a good situation. If the buzz doesn't let up, you might be asked to move to another office. They tell me Maine is very pretty this time of year, the Human Resources Director said. Johan was back in Kelly's face a day later again asking the woman for a date. After being warned by the HR director, she was in no mood for Johan. Come on, baby, your hubby's divorcing you. We don't even have to leave the city for the weekend, Johan said. Can't you take a hint? I blew up my marriage for some mediocre intimacy that I just had to have. I was such an idiot. Now go away, Kelly shrieked. 2 weeks later, Kelly accepted a job relocation to North Carolina. By the time she left to go, everybody in the company knew Johan was not the stud he thought he was. A month later, Johan transferred back to the Amsterdam office. He was a handsome, fit man who drifted through the aisles of the grocery store each Saturday morning like a man in a daze, she noted from several feet away. He never seemed to notice her, which was the norm in her life. Margaret Scanlon, called Peggy by her close friends, was a fifth-grade teacher in a local elementary school. She was average-looking, with an average body, she thought, meaning she had nothing to attract a good-looking, obviously single man. She was 29, and in a few weeks would turn the big 30, without any prospects for leaving the single life anytime soon. Peggy wondered how an attractive man like him could still be single. He appeared to be in his mid-30s. He didn't give off the vibe of a player. He seemed lost, maybe broken. Gray Penner didn't wear a wedding ring on his left hand, but Peggy determined he was single long before looking at his hand. The articles in his cart told her everything she needed to know about his marital status. Pop-Tarts, frozen pizza, macaroni and cheese, beer, and meat for the grill. Nothing screamed single, maybe even divorced, like those items. Peggy was described by many as mousy. She had short, wavy, light brown hair, large brown eyes, and fair, almost pale skin. She was 5'5" with an average-size body, decent legs, and what she considered her best feature, a muscle-butt round back. Personality-wise, she would have described herself as a wallflower. In college, her friends considered her the perfect wing woman due to her friendliness, loyalty, and her average looks. She first noticed the man in passing several months before. For some reason she still couldn't fathom, she kept noticing him and started paying closer attention about 2 months previously. Although it was completely out of character for her, she was actually considering introducing herself to him. If only. I know this might seem a little forward, but I'm Peggy Scanlon. Would you like to get a cup of coffee with me? Peggy asked a couple of weeks later when she came upon the man. Gray backed up and took a good look at the woman who just accosted him verbally. Okay, she wasn't stunning like Kelly. Not many were. But there was something in her look that made him say yes. something in her eyes that made him want to know more about this mystery woman. It was the first time in 2 years that he had considered a woman in more than just a friendly way. "Yeah, I think that would be great," Gray brightly responded. Peggy Scanlon was an open book, in fact, an easy reader. She hadn't dated much in her 29 years, and never seriously. She seemed intelligent and well-read, and he listened attentively as she explained her past. When she finished her soliloquy, she sat quietly and waited for him to spill about his past. She watched his eyes carefully and determined that he was single because he was divorced. His eyes revealed the pain that only someone who had been hurt deeply could know. She watched as he thought. She could see he was trying to figure out exactly how much of himself to reveal. He revealed virtually his entire story as she sat in rapt attention. Both sat quietly when he finished. He sighed heavily, looking at the woman as if the weight of the world was lifted from his shoulders. "I'm sorry for hitting you with that," he said as he looked up. "You're the first person I've told the whole story to. I've been told I have that effect upon people. I'm also pretty good with little kids and dogs," the woman said. Gray chuckled. He felt very comfortable with this stranger, almost like when he was with Kelly. Before the pair went their separate ways, Gray had a date for the following Friday night. The two had intimacy for the first time on their third date. Peggy was trying to hold out longer, but she proved to be the weaker partner. There was something incredible about Gray's quiet, understated demeanor she couldn't resist, even though he never made an overt maneuver. After a nice meal at a Hungarian restaurant, Gray took Peggy back to his apartment for coffee and an after-dinner liqueur. The two started out sitting close in a love seat in the living room before Peggy leaned into Gray and joined her lips to his. 10 minutes later, the pair was naked in Gray's bedroom. He noted to himself that this was the first time since his divorce that he had made love to anyone. The other times he had had it was pure and simple intimacy. He made sure to kiss the woman throughout the lovemaking. She mumbled as she lay entwined with him after they had finished. "Shh, it's all right. Plenty of time to talk later. What are you doing for the next few decades?" he noted. The woman who had been a bridesmaid 4 times finally got to be the center of attention a year later. The two later had a pair of children, a boy 2 years after the marriage and a girl another 2 years later. Unlike her predecessor, Peggy never forgot her vows. While Gray would never know it, Kelly never forgot that lesson again. Several years after moving to North Carolina, she remarried, remaining faithful to her second husband for 15 years, until she caught him cheating. She admitted to herself that she finally understood the pain Gray endured and wasted no time in divorcing her second spouse. Kelly had always taken good care of herself and still went to the gym on a regular basis. She was still an attractive woman as she approached 50. Single, alone, and approaching 50. She never saw that coming, not even in her wildest dreams. Her second husband was a decade older than she was, had no children, and didn't want any with Kelly. Now it was too late, although she knew that there were plenty of 30-something men who would gladly put a baby inside of her, although none wanted to stick around and be more than just a sperm donor. She laughed aloud to herself. More of a bark, really. Gray had wanted 2 children. She had wanted 3. So by now, the couple's 3 children would all be in their teens. She and Gray would be attending various school and social events, sports, band, and PTA. Graduations, both high school and college, wouldn't be far away, followed by weddings and grandchildren. All of that is gone. For mediocre adventure. What an entitled, dumb woman she was. She shook her head sadly, for probably the 1,000th time. If she was limber enough to kick her own back. A few months later, halfway across the country, Gray and Peggy Penner, along with their 15-year-old son Reggie, were sitting in the gymnasium of their local high school, watching their 18-year-old daughter Phyllis accept her diploma. Peggy squeezed her husband's arm, and the two exchanged looks with their eyes filled with happy tears. Gray leaned in and gave his wife a quick peck on her lips, causing their son to wince in teenage embarrassment. "Oh, come on, you two. Not here, not now," he whined. His parents smiled at him, then at each other. They both wiggled their eyebrows. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.